She only wanted to survive the night. At the end of the blizzard, however, something would melt more than the snow. Sometimes living is choosing who we will be by dawn. On that mountain, fate had already chosen for them. The wind cut through her clothes like thin blades, stealing heat, memories, and strength. Her face burned with cold, her hands wouldn't obey, and her shallow breath scratched the air in brittle clouds. For hours she had walked with no horizon, guided by an absolute white that erased paths and certainties. Each step weighed as if she were dragging the world. Solitude sounded like a mute scream inside the hood. Fatigue bent her knees, and her body begged for the forbidden pause of sleep on the ice. Her fogged mind alternated between blurred memories and a step count that no longer made sense. When she gave in to her knees, the snow received her with the chill of someone inviting the end. In a thread of consciousness, she asked the void for help, offering her very breath as a last coin. Then, in the total white, a stubborn flicker appeared, a distant blink of light refusing to disappear. Hope lit before any hearth, small, wavering, but enough to make her stand. The door gave with an old creak, as if relearning the act of opening. Inside, the smell of old wood and dust told stories of a shelter forgotten under layers of winter. A rough blanket by the wood stove, a table scarred by knives, 2 empty mugs awaiting a fate. She wrapped herself in the blanket and trembled between relief and exhaustion, like someone who returns to shore after nearly drowning. Her body, in shock, tried to sleep. Slumber came crookedly, creaking like ice under uncertain steps. Outside, the storm measured time in centuries per minute. Cold ashes kept memories of the fire, a promise of warmth not yet dead. The wind blew snow as if snuffing out birthday candles that would never come true. She didn't know the cabin wouldn't stay empty for long. When the handle trembled, the world held its breath at the same time she did. Firm steps cracked the frozen floor. A figure covered in snow crossed the threshold with the weight of one who belongs to the mountain. Seeing the body curled by the stove, the man's gaze widened from shock to concern, without room for hesitation. Tension filled the room, but the first gesture was lowering the Rafaela silent truce. Without words, he gathered wood, breathed on the sleeping ashes, and summoned the flame back to the world. The fire accepted the call and lit, as if it recognized the way home. He organized the space, pushed immediate danger away, and returned the cabin to its purpose as shelter. Hot broth warmed the metal mug, its simple scent promising the body's return. When it touched her lips, the drink reminded her there was still a possible place between cold and fever. Her tight breathing loosened a few knots. The nausea of fear lost ground. Without trading names, they understood the pact. Survive first, understand later. His presence was not a threat. It was topography, a new contour on the map of that night. Between the crackle of wood and the howl of wind, the cabin rediscovered the precarious balance of life. While the storm roared, another fire began, quietly in the distance between 2 bodies warmed by the same hearth. It wasn't haste or urgency, it was the recognition that cold outside demands warmth within. Names came like bridge lighters, whispered by silence. Elias and Clara, 2 signs of life on the white map. With identity, existence resumed its outline. Solitude lost an edge. Claire admitted to herself that she had been lost twice, from the path and from who she had been. Within, Elias recognized the memory of an old debt. Once, strange hands had saved him too. Closeness wasn't abrupt. It was the sum of small gestures. Stacked wood, a filled mug, a shared blanket. Warmth took shape, in shoulders touching, in breaths heard, in a calm that asked for no justification. She felt her body return to itself, like someone coming back from too long an absence. He discovered shelter wasn't the cabinet, was her presence radiating a rare kind of return. The fear that had hardened everything began to soften at the edge of the flame. She only meant to outlast the night, but that man, without promises, melted more than the snow. The night stretched to the limit of endurance. Her body, finally warmed by the blanket he had offered, yielded to sleep. Meanwhile, he lay on the floor near the hearth, awake enough to hear the wind and ensure nothing threatened that newly found shelter. The crackle of the fire was the last melody she heard before falling completely asleep. For the first time in days, fear fell silent. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside the cabin there was a warm silence, the kind that protects. When dawn touched the cracks in the window, he was already up. The air smelled of wood smoke, fresh coffee, and a care that needed no words. He prepared a simple breakfast, rekindled the fire, and soon after stepped out with firm strides to fetch wood, water, and whatever was needed to keep life going. Every movement was the gesture of someone who had learned to survive with little, now doing it for two. Watched in silence, unwilling to break the harmony forming there. She felt a blend of gratitude and strangeness, as if fate so cruel the day before now offered a truce. He wouldn't let her help. Each time she tried to stand, a firm yet gentle gesture asked her to stay. Rest, his actions said without sound. Let the world move by itself today. The day unfolded in simple gestures, he tidying the surroundings, she folding small garments drying by the heat, the distant sound of water warming on an old burner. The unlikely normality of that routine mended both their souls. Between one look and another, something unplanned was born. A subtle, discreet feeling infiltrated the spaces of silence, growing with the hearth's warmth. The initial fear dissolved, giving way to that confusing sensation of being exactly where one should be, even without knowing why. When dusk painted itself gray and gold, the cabin breathed a new kind of peace. They were there to survivors from different worlds, sharing a slice of time stolen from death. Night came again, and with it, the cold. But there was now a fire not born of wood. Sitting by the hearth, their eyes met in a way neither dared avoid. The kiss happened like lightning under a clear sky, inevitable, brief, and profoundly true. But she withdrew, heart offbeat, as if remembering that some feelings, born amid snow, burn more than they should. She lay down soon after, letting the fire and silence take over the rest of the night. Morning arrived slowly, filtering through the wooden seams like a promise. She woke to the light sounds of utensils, the crackle of fire, the scrape of metal, the warm smell of coffee. He was already on his feet, his body moving naturally between tasks. He took care of everything, stacked wood, fetched water, fed the flame. Each gesture was simple, but full of purpose, and she watched in silence, trying to understand the source of such steadiness. When he returned from the snow, coat covered in crystals and face reddened by the cold, something in her opened. There was a quiet strength in that mana presence that warmed more than the fire. She no longer saw only the stranger who had saved her. She saw the shelter the world had denied her. The day moved slowly, full of small things. Steam rising from the pot, restrained laughter, the sound of wood burning. And among it all, the looks long, lingering, evasive, became inevitable. That cabin, isolated from everything, began to feel like a home. When night arrived, the cold outside thickened, but inside the temperature rose like a shared secret. She sat near the fire, trying to warm her hands, but the heat she felt no longer came from the hearth. He took off the heavy jacket and remained in a coarse shirt. Damp fabric clung to him, revealing the firmness of his shoulders, the deep breath, skin marked by cold and life. The flame traced each of his contours as if the world had paused to admire. And she looked at him with a kind of astonishment. Only true desire carries quiet. Inevitable. The air grew shorter, denser. She approached slowly, without thinking, guided by something she couldn't name. When he turned his face toward her, there were no words, only the instant their gazes touched, and nothing else needed to be said. Time split there. Touch came like an answer the body had been waiting for. Her breath met his. The cold fled the walls, and the world reduced itself to warmth, skin, and silence. It was a meeting of survivors, two hearts that had lost everything and now recognized themselves in each other. There was no hurry, only the certainty that, for the first time, they were alive again. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the cabin, winter had finally ended. Dawn found them both asleep under the same blanket, the fire still alive in soft embers. Light crossed the cabin's seams and drew their outlines as if the sun recognized them. For the first time, the cold didn't reach them. He woke first. For a moment, he simply watched her serene face, hair tousled on the makeshift pillow, chest rising in a slow, steady rhythm. There was something sacred in that silence, a kind of peace he no longer remembered. When she awoke, the world already seemed different. There was no fear anymore, only a strange sense of belonging, as if she had returned from a long absence. The glance they shared was brief but said everything. They were together now, and that was enough. The day opened with the familiar sound of wood and boiling water. They laughed, shared bread, coffee, and silence. They spoke little, but understood each other by gestures. Love there was made of simple things, like the life they were rebuilding. Elias taught how to read the wind before going out, how to choose the right wood, how to measure the time of flame. Lara watched every detail, fascinated by the calm strength with which he handled the world. In each of his gestures there was something that drew her more than words. 3 days passed like that, between heat and silence, between fear and a new beginning. Time inside seemed suspended, as if the rest of the world had paused to let them live only that. Outside, the snow insisted, but no longer threatened. It seemed merely to watch. At night, when the wind blew hard again, he reinforced the roof, set the locks, protected the fire. She helped, laughing when flakes landed on his face and melted like small confessions. That little cabin had become the entire universe. But no truce lasts forever. The third dawn came with the dull sound of wood giving way, a deep crack, like the omen of something breaking inside before it falls. The storm returned, heavier, and fate once again knocked on the door. The crack came first, muffled and distant, like thunder trapped underground. Then the dry rip of wood splitting in two. The roof, saturated with snow, gave way at once, and the cabin that had sheltered them became a storm of splinters and white dust. The fire died in a breath. The wind roared through the seams, raising dust and ice. By instinct, he pulled her outside through the smoke, guided only by the force of despair and the sound of her breathing. Outside, the world was a living wall of snow. Visibility was almost none. Everything spun in a white whirl. Flakes struck like needles, and the air hurt in their lungs. Still they went on, hands joined, steps sinking, hearts sustaining what bodies could not. Amid the night's shadows, a dark shape appeared, an old structure, perhaps a long-abandoned barn. He broke the door with his shoulder, and together they fell inside, covered in snow and exhausted. Their silence returned. Only the wind trying to enter reminded them the world still raged outside. They curled up in the most sheltered corner, trembling, sharing the little warmth that remained. No hearth, no blanket, only the touch of two lives stubbornly holding on. And in the midst of that frozen ruin, love the same that was born Shiramond, standing invisible yet whole. The storm passed at dawn. The silence that followed was so vast it felt like another world. Outside, everything was covered by a new layer of white, pure, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But within them, something had changed forever. Cold had lost its name. Love had not. When the sun returned to touch the mountain, the magic that had bound them also began to loosen. Not because it had ended, but because the world outside demanded a return. He had roots there, old promises, ghosts of a past that kept him anchored. She in turn belonged to another time, another place. Their love had been born in the interval between two winters, and every interval, sooner or later, closes. In the clear morning, they shared a last look. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Some feelings are so intense that once named, they lose eternity. She walked to the bend in the valley, leaving 2 footprints behind her that the wind slowly erased, as if keeping a secret. He stood in the barn's doorway, watching until the very last moment. And in the distant reflection of the snow, something shone, the fire the two of them had lit. Some winters never return. But some fires, no matter how the cold insists, never go out.